My apologies, brothers and sisters. Apologies. All right, let me go again. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm happy for the opportunity of having another Thursday afternoon webinar with all of us. I hope we have had a blessed week, and looking forward to another Thursday afternoon webinar. As always, we would like to start with prayer, so I want to invite you all to just bow your heads as we pray together. Father, we pause again to acknowledge your presence and to recognize your goodness displayed in our lives as you have continued to bless and keep us. We're here again this afternoon to study your word together. And I pray that you will give us clarity, that you will help me, Father, that I might understand and be able to share the insights that are to be found in your word. And I pray for these, my brothers and sisters, that we all might be blessed with a greater understanding, yes, but also with a closer walk with you. Thank you, Father, for hearing. Thank you for granting these things, as we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so welcome again, everyone. It's good to see you all. And we will continue our study in the book of John. This afternoon we start with chapter 6. And what we have been going through so far, I hope it has been a blessing. Mostly what we have seen in the past few weeks has been, the way the Jews have related to Jesus. There seems to be a constant confrontation each time he encounters the leaders of the Jewish church. And these things are put in the Bible as a caution to those of us who are living in this time and who are studying the Word of God. What I have seen and what stands out in my mind is the way that religious institutionalism can blind the mind of people. I don't think it's coincidence that so much is recorded in the Bible of how the Jews stood up and opposed Jesus, the leadership especially. And it speaks to us of the danger of being so committed to an organization or an institution, of being so locked into believing that this thing belongs to God, that we lose our ability to think, we lose our sense of reason and balance. And it's a lesson to us today, because the same situation prevails today in many, many religious groups and denominations. It's just that it's human nature to learn to put their trust in other human beings, to learn to put their trust in people, and to not seek a personal relationship with God. It's human nature. And that's why this danger is a perpetual danger. Even when we look at what the Bible says about the end of time, we see that the last great crisis to arise on this earth will be the mark of the beast crisis, and it becomes worldwide. It envelops the entire planet because people learn to put their trust in human beings, and they don't develop a relationship with God for themselves. That's the reason why this crisis will deceive so many millions and even billions. Just something to bear in mind, because this afternoon we're going to be looking again at Jesus. Well, I don't know if we'll get that far in this chapter. Maybe we will, because the first part of the chapter, we're actually going to John chapter 6 this evening. And the first part of this chapter is not really so much John chapter 6. It's not really so much, there is not a lot of commentary that I find that I could make on this first part of the chapter. It's mostly telling a story, telling the story of what happened when Jesus, fed the 5,000. And there are lessons there, but what I mean, there are not any deep statements with deep ideas that need to be thoroughly discussed. So the first few verses, we probably will go through fairly quickly. If we start in verse 1, it says, "After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias." It might have been helpful if I'd had the chance to do some preparation. We probably could have looked at some maps. I don't really want to go to the map at the moment. I don't want to wonder how long it will take. Let me see. Yeah, I probably will leave that alone this evening. I don't want to become too tangled up in searching around. Anyway, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee was really a huge lake. Let me see, I probably could show you. Just to get an idea of what it's talking about when it talks about the Sea of Galilee. Give me a second. Alright, maps of the Holy Land. Let's see if we can find something here that will bring out. Alright, well, maybe this will help. Let me see, can we make this any bigger? Probably not. Alright, if you look at this map, this will probably help a little bit. Sorry for the hold up, guys. It just occurred to me as I was looking at this that we probably could look at the map. But if you look at this map of Palestine, this little blue speck right in the middle, this is the Sea of Galilee. So what you can see is that it's not really a sea, it's a big lake. It was also called the Sea of Tiberias. So the blue on the left is the Mediterranean Sea. That's a genuine sea, saltwater sea. But what is called the Sea of Galilee was a very large lake. It's an inland body of water. I don't think it was salt water either. But it's called a sea because it was so big that, of course, it was referred to as a sea. All right? That was... I just wanted to put that in. Anyway, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee. This is after he had the encounter with the Jews when he had healed the man on the Sabbath day, the man who had been sick for 38 years, a crippled man. After this, he went over the Sea of Tiberias, which means he went to the other side. As it says over here, he went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And a great multitude followed him, because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. Now there's something significant I want us to notice here. I'm going to come back to this comment, that these people followed him because they saw his miracles which he did on those that were diseased. The topic of our presentation this afternoon is faulty belief or faulty faith. And I want to get to the point where I can really highlight why I have given our study this title this evening. But it probably has some bearing on it to consider here that these people came to follow Jesus. It says because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. Those miracles really made them understand that Jesus was an unusual person. Maybe it even persuaded many of them that he was the one who was promised, It seems like as we go a little further down, it seems like they believed that he was the promised. Some of them began to believe he was the Messiah. Some of them began to believe that he was some great person who had been promised in prophecy. When we look at what the questions that were asked of John the Baptist, we see that they were looking for a prophet, they were looking for that prophet, and they were looking for the Messiah. So many of these people probably saw these miracles and they were persuaded he was one of these people. But then again, we're going to see that this was not a correct focus of their faith, if that was all that they had. All right? We'll come to that. It says, and Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. So, apparently this is a huge hill, a big hill. So, he goes and he sits down. It says, and the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. I'm not sure why it mentions the Passover here, except maybe to say that this is why so many people were present, because it turns out that when you look at what happened, there were 5,000 men there, and it doesn't mention women and children. So there was a huge mass of people. They saw Jesus going over the sea, and they found a way, and they went there as well. So he climbs up into this hill, and he sits there with his disciples, and it must have been a massive hill because so many people. But apparently they came to the Passover. It was near. They came for the Passover, and they heard about Jesus, and everybody wanted to hear and to see him. So this massive crowd is following him. It says, when Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, when shall we buy bread that these may eat? And if you read the same account in some of the other books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, you will find that it says that, after he had been there preaching to them for most of the day, they were hungry. He saw that they were hungry. I think it says in one place he saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he had compassion on them. And so he says to Philip, where are we going to find bread? Where shall we buy bread that these may eat? And that's really a strange question, because even today, where would you find any store, even today, that will have enough bread to feed maybe about, if it's 5,000 men plus women and children, it's probably about 10,000 people. If that question were to arise today in my town, I think we could buy out all the supermarkets and we probably couldn't feed everybody. So, in those days, I suppose it was really a massive question, but look at what it says in verse 6. And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. It's interesting that when you look at Jesus' way of doing things, he's always doing things like this. Well, very often you find him doing something like this. He's asking people questions when he already knows the answer, or he knows that there's no answer. For example, when he met the woman at the well, he said, go and call your husband and come. He knows that the woman has no husband, but he's seeking to provoke a response from the woman. And the same thing here with Philip. And it's a method of teaching. It's a method of teaching. And I myself, I've found this to be very helpful. Sometimes when you want to really get people's attention, the best way to do it is to ask them a question. Like Jesus said to the woman, give me some water to drink. He asks her something. He does something to compel her to pay attention. And that's what happens. When I'm having a meeting or I'm teaching, usually I like to do this. If I find that people may be missing the point or they are getting distracted, I will ask questions. Because you find that when people have to answer questions, they start to think about the subject, and so they are open to answers. They become better focused on what you are trying to say. And that's what Jesus is doing. It says that he did this to prove Philip. It says in the NASB, he did it to test him. But I don't even think he was trying to test Philip, because what could Philip say? I think he really wants to get Philip's attention, and through Philip to get the attention of the other disciples as well. He wants them to think about the situation they're in. He wants them to consider that they have a problem on their hands, and he wants them to consider, what can we do about this? Because he wants to teach them a lesson. He wants to show them that if you put your trust in God, if you depend on God, God always has an answer, and God will come through. I look at this miracle along with others, and sometimes I wonder, wow, is Jesus saying this is how we need to behave in situations like this? I mean, honestly, it's hard to come up with an answer that says, yes, this is how we should operate. If you're among a group of people, and you're teaching and they get hungry, and there's a large crowd and there's nowhere to get food, then you find what you can and you multiply it and feed them. Is this what Jesus is saying? He certainly wants to catch their attention for some reason. And so he says, where are we going to get food to buy, that they may get something to eat? He definitely is trying to catch their attention, and I suppose the question is, if Jesus wants to catch your attention, what is the lesson he wants you to learn? That's a question. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. Now, I'm going to highlight something here. On the left, of course, is the King James Version. I'm going to put the NIV, New International Version, on the right, because I want to make a point. If you notice in the NIV, if you look at the NIV, the New International Version, which is the favorite version of many people, it says, Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Now, I am pointing this out because I wanted to show you where, in this case, the NIV, it helps you to understand. But you can see that the NIV is not a correct translation. It's not an exact translation. If I go to the NASB, the NASB said, Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. If you look at it, you can see that the King James Version translated the denarii to pennies. Denarii is translated as pennies. Denarii was probably was a Roman monetary coin. The Roman monetary system used the denarii. When the King James Version was written, the British used pennies, pounds, shillings, and pennies. So they translated it. Instead of using the Roman term, they used the English term penny. So it says 200 pennyworth of bread, but it's accurate. It talks about 200. The NASB, which is kind of more strict in sticking to what is actually the literal translation, has translated 200. And it translated denarii, so you know exactly what Philip said, 200 denarii. He didn't say 200 pennies, because there were no pennies in the days of Jesus. I'm really making this point because I want to show you a little bit about why and how translations can be faulty and yet can be helpful. So you know, Jesus didn't say pennies, but the King James Version is trying to help you to get an idea of how much it might be, because nobody knows what is a denarii. At least nobody today. I certainly don't know what is a denarii. I know that it was what the Romans used, but how much is it worth? Now, in the days of the King James Version, if you said 200 pennies, anybody that was reading it would get an idea of how much that is worth. Like if I said today, $200,000 or $50,000. If I say US dollars, you know exactly how much I'm talking about, and you know how much that could buy and what that is worth. Now let's see if we can look at the NIV. The NIV, it would take more than half a year's wages. Now this one is not a translation. That's the point I want to make. It does not translate either denarii or 200. Now I'm making this point because I want you to understand why sometimes people say that the NIV is not a trustworthy translation, because what they are doing, they are translating the idea. They are translating the idea instead of the words. So it depends upon what they understand the idea to be. It depends on their idea of what Jesus is really saying. And sometimes they are wrong. The NIV is a translation that has somewhat, not a direct translation, but a paraphrase. It's somewhat of a paraphrase. And so even though in this case, it helps you to have an idea what Jesus is saying, because you can say, how much is 200 penny worth? How much is 200 denarii? Well, it helps if you know that, wow, half a year's wages. It's about more than a half a year's wages. The NIV gives you that idea. So 200 denarii. So a man in a year would have earned about average 300 denarii, or 350 denarii for the year. So you know that 200 would have been a little bit more than half a year's wages. So you get an idea of how much money it would take. But at the same time, it helps with understanding. But you have to be careful because it's not a translation. If you're looking for a translation, the King James Version is closer to the truth. And maybe you would say the NASB is the one that you would go with if you're looking for an exact translation. So I hope that it's not directly related to what we are looking at this evening, but I think it's a helpful insight into why it is that sometimes we look at different translations, but we're careful and we have to know how we are dealing with those translations, because otherwise, in this case, I don't think it would matter much. It doesn't affect much how we understand the passage we are reading, but there are times when you have similar situations and it can significantly affect what we are studying. So just something I wanted to highlight, because people are always saying this version is better, this version is better, this one is the best, this one is a curse, this one you can't depend on. And sometimes it really is that we need to it's more helpful if we actually compare translations. Sometimes that really helps a lot. So I really take the position that I don't really condemn any translation, but I'm careful how I use, especially the modern ones. You have to know exactly what you are doing. I mean, there are a few translations like the Living Bible, for example. If you're reading historical stories of things that happened, it usually brings it to life, But if you are reading doctrine, you be very careful. The Living Bible is a perverted paraphrase. They put in their own interpretations a lot. Living Bible and other similar translations like the Good News Bible. So you have to be very careful of paraphrases. Anyway, that's really a little bit off topic, a little bit off what we were looking at. But anyway, I wanted to put that in. So, back to the text. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, There is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? So, before he did anything, Jesus created a dilemma. I said Jesus created a dilemma because look here, if it's me and I'm there preaching and people get hungry, I say, well, brethren, let's have the closing prayer, and I'd like to set you free that you can go and have something to eat. You can go home, or you can go to the store or something. But that's me. I'm sending them home. But Jesus, instead of this, he creates a dilemma because he suggests that it is their duty to feed these people. And of course, Philip is astonished. Philip is flabbergasted. He says, look here, if we had a half year's salary, and if we could even find the shops half a year's salary, and we were able to spend that on bread, it's not enough for all of them, that each of them would get just a little bit, just a little bite. Now I don't know why Peter brings up this idea, because I don't know how he got to know that this boy has food. I suppose somewhere along the line he saw this little boy with his basket with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. It seems like he was the only little boy who was sensible enough to take some food with him. Everybody else was so excited that they came empty-handed, and they had no thought of what would happen when they got hungry, except this one little prudent little boy who brought his basket with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, why does Peter even mention this to Jesus? He might be doing it as a joke, or I don't know if he's doing it with some slim hope that Jesus can do something. I'm not sure. You know, I think most likely he's saying, Lord, what you're asking about is a hopeless situation. The only food on the entire mountain, is a boy who has a few loaves of bread and 2 small fishes. But I mean, it's hopeless because there are 10,000 people here. So, I mean, what you're looking for is an impossibility. There's really no hope of feeding these people. As a matter of fact, when you read in one of the other books, Matthew, Mark, or Luke, it says the disciples told Jesus to send them away, that they could find food. Send them away, send them home, because that's what we would normally do. So Jesus is deliberately provoking a dilemma because he wants to show them something. He wants to teach them something. And that's why I'm asking the question, what are we supposed to learn? What lesson are we to take away from this situation? Jesus creates a situation. And I'm sure that the main point is that he wants to teach a lesson, because the most rational thing to do, and I suppose on other occasions that's what happened, you know. Twice Jesus fed multitudes. But I suppose that on other occasions people just left and went home and got something to eat. But a lot of what we see with some of these miracles of Jesus is that he seems to be provoking situations because he wants to make a point. Like the man at the pool that we were looking at for the past couple of weeks. That man was there with many other sick people. Jesus went there and picked on him particularly, and then told him to take up his bed and walk. So Peter says, there's a boy here. He has 5 loaves and 2 small fishes. And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number, about 5,000. So it's kind of interesting. When I ask myself the question, I wonder what they were thinking, because Jesus is asking them about food. They said they have these 2 loaves and fishes, and then Jesus says, tell the people to sit down. Wow. And I can imagine the disciples, the excitement that is in them, because they think correctly that they're about to see something extraordinary. So they filter among the crowd, and they get the people to start sitting down. They said, the master says to sit down. The master says to sit down. Nobody knows what they are going to sit down for, but he tells them to sit down. I suppose they've all been standing, but if you're going to feed people, to be able to move among them freely and to do what you're doing, you need to get them to sit down. So Jesus tells them to get the men to sit down. And so everybody sits down, and they kind of estimate the number. It's about 5,000. Give me a second. Sorry, I had a fan. I had a fan going, but it's getting cool. The weather has changed. We had a lot of rain over the past few weeks. A lot of rain, and usually that's how the climate changes. We have a very hot summer, then we have a long rainy season, and after the rainy season is over, then the cool time starts. So it's getting cool now. But anyway, so everybody sits down. It says, and Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they could. John leaves out some details, but when you read the other versions, it tells you that he took the bread and the fish and he began to break them. So I've seen pictures, and I've seen even some of these movies that they have where you have, the people handing out full loaves of bread and complete fishes. That's why sometimes it's a little dangerous. You get things distorted in your mind when you look at things secondhand. When you read the Bible, it says that Jesus broke the bread and he broke the fishes. So what the people got were pieces of bread and pieces of fish. And that must have been a miracle. I mean, it would have been something to be there that day to watch that miracle. Because as he's breaking, let's say he has a piece of bread in his hand. He breaks it, and he breaks it, and he breaks it, and he has broken off enough that the loaf should be finished. But it's just as big in his hand, and he keeps on breaking and breaking and breaking, and as he breaks, it's just as big in his hand. And there are 5 loaves, so I don't know. Maybe by the time he finishes breaking 1,000 times, then one loaf finally finishes. And as he's breaking, his disciples get some vessels. I don't know where they get vessels from, because there are no, I don't suppose anybody came with trays, because they didn't come with food. So maybe what they did, they got one of those cloaks or shawls that they carried. They got some of these, and they put the bread and the fish on it, and they went and they distributed to people. Something like that. It was makeshift. But while he's breaking, they come and they collect, and they go off, and they come back and they collect, and they go off, and they come and they collect, and they're working their way through the crowd. And here this pile of bread and fish is just growing before Jesus as he's breaking the 5 loaves and two fishes. Can you imagine? 2 fishes. So he's breaking the fish, and fried fish or boiled fish or roasted fish. Roasted fish is just increasing. It's interesting when you think of the miracle, because normally, you get the fish, then you roast it. But what he's getting is roasted fish. Already roasted, already cooked, already prepared, already seasoned or whatever. And as he's breaking, he's just getting more and more and more of this fish. From 2 fish, enough pieces to feed probably nearly 10,000 people. Maybe there were more men than women and children, but it was definitely significantly more than 5,000, because the 5,000 were men. Another one of the Gospels say it was 5,000 men besides women and children. So it's interesting that it says Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, all right, that's it doesn't even say that he asked God to multiply the loaves. It says he just gave God thanks, because he knew what his Father had given him the authority and the power to do. When he was about to raise Lazarus, he said, Father, I thank you for hearing me. That was his prayer. And I know that you hear me always. But I just said these words. I just spoke this prayer for the benefit of those who are standing by. And that kind of gives you an insight into how Jesus is operating. He's doing these things. A lot of it is not in the moment that it is happening. It's that he's doing it for the sake of the people. Maybe even the miracle itself. But even when he gives thanks, it's a lesson. He wants the people to understand his dependence on God. He wants the people to understand that when you trust in God, God does the most extraordinary things. So he takes the loaves, the 5 loaves of bread, and he gives thanks. Then he just starts handing out to his disciples. He just starts breaking and handing out, and everybody eats. And it says, when they were filled, everybody had eaten till he was full. He couldn't hold anymore. He said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. This is again another interesting thing to me. First of all, well, let me look at what happened when they went out to gather up. It says, therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. So apparently for some reason people carried baskets with them. I don't know. I don't know where they got baskets from. I don't know what people would have carried baskets for. Maybe they were on their way home from the market or something. But anyway, they found 12 baskets and they filled. There was so much food left over. So I suppose when the disciples went out, they probably piled up the food at one spot and told the people to take what they needed. They went and piled it at another spot, And so when everybody took and ate, then there was a lot left. And they went and they gathered everything together. They filled 12 baskets. Now the other thing I'm thinking is there's something here, and I don't quite get the lesson, because I'm wondering, why did Jesus tell them to gather up what was left over? Because if a man can turn 5 loaves of bread into hundreds of pounds of food, why do you need to gather up the small pieces that remain? Why do you need to gather them up? Because you never have a problem with food anymore. You just multiply what you have. But why gather up 12 baskets full of what remains? And secondly, I wonder what they did with those 12 baskets. Did they give them away? Or did Jesus and his disciples walk around with them and use them for food for the next few days? I suppose if he had 12 disciples, each of them could get a basket, but that would probably run out, and maybe it would maybe last them for maybe a day or two. I don't know how long the fish would have lasted, but it's interesting. And it seems to me that that leftover food would have been something special, because every time you took it in your hand, you would think, my goodness, this was something that never existed until Jesus' hand touched it, because the original bread and fish would of course have been used up long ago. The bread that they had in their hands was created on the spot, even though it was broken off from the original loaf of bread. But before their eyes, they had seen the miracle of something created. So this was directly the work of God that nobody could deny. So they were walking around with 12 baskets of miracles. And I don't know if this is why Jesus told them to gather it up, because when God does something, it shouldn't be treated with contempt or impunity or disrespect. If God does something, it's something special. Why would God do a miracle, even if it's simply provide food? And why would you discard the leftover? Why would you leave it for the birds or for animals to come and eat it? The fact that God's hand is involved here makes it something special. It's like Mount Sinai, where God came down. Even today, Christians have some kind of reverence for that mountain. And if they were to find the 10 Commandments, I'm sure Christians would treat it with great reverence. Not because there's anything innately holy about the mountain or even about the stones, but because when God's hand directly touches something, I suppose God's hand touches everything on the planet. I suppose, God created this world. But sometimes there's a greater wonderment about something where he intervened afterwards. That's why Christians love to go to Jerusalem and all that kind of thing. Because they think that, here were some of the places and the things that were actually touched by the Son of God when he came to this world. So anyway, it's interesting that Jesus said, gather up the fragments. It's a lesson in being prudent, in not being wasteful. It's a lesson in that, I'm sure. But I think there's something a little deeper there that I'm not quite getting. And to me, it has something to do with the fact that this was the direct creative work of God. It made it valuable, I suppose if it were me, I would want to eat every scrap of that bread. I'd almost feel like that bread has some special benefit and blessing in it. And I would keep a bag of it and eat. I wouldn't throw away anything until it was finished. Every time I'm partaking of it, I'll be thinking of the miracle, and I'll be thinking God's hand is on this bread. All the nutrients that I need, every benefit that I would want, it must be in this food. So all of that, the nature of the miracle made it something special. And so Jesus said, gather up the fragments. Whatever they did with those fragments, it's interesting. So it says they filled 12 baskets with the leftovers. Now look at what happened. Then those men, the majority of those 5,000, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. So they are convinced. They've heard of his miracles, and maybe some of them saw before when he healed the sick and so on. But now here's a different kind of miracle. Here Jesus provides food for an army, close to 10,000 people. And out of nothing, he provides enough food to feed everybody with a massive amount left over. And this persuades these people that this cannot be any normal prophet. But they said, this is of a truth, that prophet. Because as we have seen, the Jews had the expectation that there was going to come a special prophet. When John the Baptist was preaching, you remember what happened where they came to him. If you look, let me go to the King James Version. If you look, if you remember, when we read in verses 19 to 21, it says, this is the record of John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who art thou? And he confessed and denied not, but confessed, I am not the Christ. And they asked him, what then? Art thou Elias, Elijah? And he said, I am not. Referred to as that prophet. And it was most likely the one that Moses had prophesied about. The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like unto me. That one that was to become a great leader in Israel. Elijah was a great prophet, but he was not a great leader. He was like a lonely person who did mighty works. But this prophet, they understood to be a great Messiah, like Moses was, a great deliverer. So they were looking for that prophet. And so when they see the miracle that Jesus did, they said, truly, this is that prophet that should come into the world. Now look what happened. Perceived, when Jesus therefore perceived, he sees something brewing, they are up to something. And what is it? That they would come and take him by force to make him a king. He departed again into a mountain himself alone. And that's pretty amazing. These people, if you notice, they are so fixated. Their agenda is so single-minded. They are so sure that they know exactly what is to happen. Once they come to the conclusion that this is that prophet, okay, they are ready to take the next step. They're going to take him by force and make him into a king. Now, I don't know how you make somebody into a king by force. I suppose you'd have to think the person has to be willing to cooperate. But they were not willing to ask Jesus, what is your purpose? When it says they were coming to take him by force to make him a king, I think what it means is that they were ready to go and start a war. These people were ready to go and kill Romans and to rebel against the Roman government and to set up Jesus as the king of Israel. Whatever it took to establish him as king, they were ready to do it. They were ready to start a revolution. I think that's what it means. It doesn't mean that they were going to take him and imprison him or tie him up and make him into a king, because you can't force somebody to be a king. And so he moved away from them, he left them, and he went away into a mountain by himself alone. So, I suppose after the initial excitement, Jesus goes away, and it says his disciples, the other Gospels tell you that it was Jesus who sent them away, told them to go back over the other side of the lake. And they entered into a ship and went over the sea towards Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. So, they evening and night caught them on the way. I suppose it was a pretty long journey, even by sea, to get to the other side, but it was much shorter than walking the long way around. So they are traveling by sea, and apparently part of the reason why they are moving so slowly is that the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. All right, so there is a bit of a storm on the sea, and the wind is contrary, so they are rowing and they're not making much progress. It's dark and it's windy, and there are huge waves that are being stirred up by the wind. And from this you can tell that it's really a big lake, because on a small lake you usually don't have big waves. But it's the same sea where we are told on one occasion that the ship was about to sink because of the waves, and Jesus was sleeping in the ship. So you can tell it's a pretty big lake. So they are rowing and they can't get to the other side. And there's a storm. And it's night now, and the sea arose. The sea arose means that there are huge waves that are breaking against the boat. So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, 8 furlongs make a mile. Okay, so it's a pretty long journey. So it's several miles from one side to the other, and they are crossing by boat. So let me see what the other versions tell you about the distance. If you look at the NASB, it says when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. Right. Right, so 4/8 is 32. So if it's about 30 furlongs, right, it's about 4 miles. So it was a pretty long trip. It wasn't just that they took a short trip across 4 miles. How long does it take you to row 4 miles? They were on the sea for a good while. And then they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. And you know the rest of the story. In Matthew it tells you that Peter said, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you. And Peter began to walk on the sea. But when he saw the waves, he was afraid and he began to sink. John bypasses all those details. It just tells you, he said unto them, it is I, be not afraid. Because in Matthew it tells you that they thought he was a spirit. So clearly, they had belief in ghosts back in those days as well. So they thought he was some kind of spirit. But when he called out to them, it's I, don't be afraid. Then Peter asked him to let him come to him, and we know the story. It's not here in the book of John. It says, then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. So almost immediately, as soon as they took Jesus into the ship, the wind died down, and they found themselves almost immediately at the land. So that was again another indication of the power of Jesus, that the wind died down and all the struggle they had been going through came to an end. And the ship had reached the destination. Now, we're almost at the end of time, and I wanted to make one other point. And I'm going to read the next 4 or 5 verses. And I'm just going to comment briefly, and we will pick up from there next week, because I want to make the point before we close off. It says, the day following, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there, save that one whereinto his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. So there was one boat left. And the people who were there on the other side, who had been fed, they saw, I suppose they were waiting for Jesus to come down. And then they saw the disciples come down, and they got into the one boat and they left. So the people were wondering, where is Jesus? But Jesus came down in the night by himself and walked on the water. And they never saw him leave, because there was no other boat at the spot. And it says, when the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, they gathered that he had gone. Neither his disciples, they also took shipping. So they got on boats the next morning, and they came to Capernaum seeking for Jesus. So Jesus gave them the slip. He came down in the night and walked on the water and joined up with his disciples. But in the morning they recognized that he's not there. And they saw when the disciples left. So they figure, if we can find the disciples, we'll find him. So they get into boats, and they come to Capernaum, and they are looking for Jesus. Now here's the thing. When they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? When did you get here? They're amazed, because they never saw him leave, and yet here he is. And Jesus says something, which is kind of my closing point today. He says something. It's amazing how Jesus sometimes says things that seem offensive and that would turn people off. Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I'm telling you something. You seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled. He says, I'm telling you something. You didn't come looking for me because you saw the miracles, but because you had your belly filled. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. Now I'm going to comment on this briefly, and maybe next week we'll look at it a little bit more. But here's the interesting thing, okay? Here is a group of people who believe. They do believe. It says that when they saw the miracle that he did, they came and they said, this is that prophet. And he was that prophet, indeed he was. Because he was the one that Moses had prophesied about. He was that prophet. And they had it in mind to take him and to make him into king. That's one of the reasons why he moved away from them. So they come now and they ask him, how did you come here? And like many people who come to ask Jesus a question, he doesn't answer the question. He deals with the important issue, what we might call the elephant in the room. There's something in the background behind what they are saying and why they are there that is more important than their question. Their question is, how did you come here? There's something bigger than that. And Jesus addresses that bigger thing. And the bigger thing is that their faith is not right. Their faith is not right. He says, look here. You seek me, not because you saw the miracles. Okay, I did miracles and you saw the miracle. But the reason you are seeking me is because your belly was filled. So hold on. Was it not a miracle that their bellies were filled? Of course it was a miracle. It was the multiplying of the bread and fishes. That is what filled their bellies. But Jesus is talking about they looked at the miracle and they believed in the miracle, but their motive was wrong. If you notice this is the point Jesus is making. Your faith is based on the wrong motive. Why are they looking for him and what are they trying to say? They are trying to say that miracles are certain. Their motive gave the miracles a certain bias, a certain direction. That's what Jesus is saying. He says, you're not seeking me because you saw the miracle. How can I come from God and I don't know my mission and I don't know my purpose? There, they saw the miracles of Jesus and what it led them to do. They wanted to manipulate and bend Jesus to their agenda. They wanted to use him to fulfill their dreams of greatness for their nation. They were not to submit to his leadership as that prophet, the one who knew the will of God and was fulfilling the will of God. His agenda and his purposes is what the Son of God was here for. But they saw him as a means of fulfilling their needs. That's what he's saying. You're after what I have to give. You're not after me. You're after what you can get out of me to glorify yourself and your nation. You're not after becoming my disciples and listening to what I have to say. This is the point Jesus was making. And the point I want to make is that this is faulty faith. Believing in the power of Christ is not good enough because that's what they believed. They believed in his power. What we need to believe in is his wisdom and his authority. We need to believe in Christ in such a way that we surrender to him, we surrender to his agenda, his wisdom, his purposes, and not try to use his power for our purposes. Now, that's the most important point probably of what we have looked at and said today. And I'm certainly going to come back to this point next week and highlight it a bit more. Because it's very important, because there is so much in Christianity even today where people are highly excited about the power of Christ. The power that is available when they are not focused on the authority of Christ. The authority of Christ to rule their lives, to control and to determine how they live those lives. It's like a song says, some want the crown, but they won't bear the cross. But it takes your everything to serve my Lord. They want bright mansions, but they won't bear the cost. But it takes your everything to serve the Lord. What is being said? The main point is that if we accept Christ, we must accept him as Lord, not just try to seek his power and his abilities to fulfill our agenda. So anyway, that brings us to the end of our study for this evening. And I just want to greet everyone before I close off for the evening. We went a little bit over time, but still. I see Brother Juan Carlos as always. This evening, I just realized we have a diminished group of people, and I think it's because it's Thanksgiving. I just remember it's Thanksgiving. People at this time are having family time. Some people may be eating turkeys in America, apparently. But so I think a number of people might be missing this evening. But I see Brother Juan Carlos, Brother Chanel from Zimbabwe, Sister Angela, Brother Sam, not off on Thanksgiving shenanigans. Sister Anita is here, Brother Ralph from Germany, Brother Flavius from down there in Spain, Brother Patrick from St. Lucia, Brother Florian from Germany, Brother Mike from Germany. Quite a number of us still were able to come this evening, so I'm grateful and I'm thankful and happy to see you all. Brother Kondwani, Good to see you, my brother. Sister Eileen, you made it this evening from all the way there in the Philippines. Sister Diane made it too, escaped from the Thanksgiving rush to be with us. Brother Wayne from England, Daniel is here. Sister Marjorie, good to see you, Sister Marjorie. Sister Chris, Brother Ralph from Namibia, Sister Sharon down there in Miami. Brother Try the Spirit is here as always. Sister Lila, good to see you. Brother Clayton, good to see you. Brother Binuel, good to see you, Brother Binuel from over there in Malaysia. Brother Florian, I think your connection, you're right. It says that I was having a poor connection at one point. I think it's okay here now. Sister Beth, good to see you. Sister Maria, glad you could be here. And Sandra, it's been a while I haven't seen you, Sandra. I'm glad you could make it this evening from up there in Canada. God bless you. Sister Angela, is it Billot or Below? First time I think I'm seeing you, Sister Angela. But I am so happy you were able to make it and join us this afternoon. God bless you all, and I wish you all a good evening. Those of you who are having Thanksgiving,